Oriental Ceramic Society lecture. We're doing this in association with the Society. We have its president, Regina Krall, here, and she would like to speak to you about the Society for just a few moments. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm president of the Oriental Ceramic Society, and I'm working as a research consultant here for Sotheby's. The Oriental Ceramic Society is based in London, founded in 1921, a very ancient society. Most of our events are, of course, in London, but we have a loyal group of members in the US, and we're starting to put a little program together for US members now as well. We had yesterday a handling session of objects from the storage at the Met, which was very exciting. We had last season a viewing session at the Brooklyn Museum, and we're trying to do more events like that, and we're very grateful for the cooperation with Sotheby's for lectures. And obviously we welcome new members, so in case you're interested, please speak to me, and I would be happy to join you on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dina. Our speaker, actually, we've lost some of our friends from the Acklands. If anybody would like to move forward, there are some seats up a little bit closer that people are more comfortable. Our speaker this afternoon is one seriously busy lady, and so we are particularly pleased that we were able to schedule her so that she might cast some of her bright light onto the ever-captivating and alluring field of stone ceramics. It's a wonderful compliment to our superb selection of the collection of Sakamoto Goro's, some of his stone ceramics, which is upstairs displayed on the 10th floor. So if you haven't already been, we encourage you to go. And of course, after the lecture, there will be drinks upstairs, so you can have an opportunity to view it then as well. The list of Ms. Bauer's accomplishments are long, so I'm going to keep it just to the highlights. An adjunct associate professor at the University of the Arts, Philadelphia, and frequent visiting instructor at Kean University and Rutgers University, New Jersey, Virginia L. Bauer did her graduate work in Chinese art and archaeology at Princeton University. Ms. Bauer has visited China numerous times, first as a student of Chinese in Taiwan, and later doing research, as well as acting as a tour lecturer for groups sponsored by the American Museum of Natural History. Princeton University Art Museum, the Smithsonian Institution, and other educational and museum institutions. Her special interests are Chinese ceramics and the arts and culture of the early imperial dynasties. She is a frequent lecturer at galleries and museums, most recently at Wake Forest and Vanderbilt universities. Along with Li Zhiyan and He Li, she was a co-editor of Chinese ceramics from the Paleolithic period through the Qing dynasty, published by Yale University Press in 2010. She has also contributed to numerous museum catalogs, including Brush, Clay, and Wood, the Nancy and Ed Rosenthal Collection of Chinese Art, an exhibition at the Taft Museum in Cincinnati, Ohio in 2008, Recarving China's Past, Art, Archaeology, and Architecture of the Wu Family Shrines, an exhibition at the Princeton University Art Museum in 2005, Asian Games, the Art of Contest, the Asian Society of New York 2004, and was the primary author of From Court to Caravan, Chinese tomb sculptures from the collection of Anthony M. Solomon at the Harvard University Art Museums in 2002. On a personal note, I'm particularly happy to be making this introduction, as she has been something of an inspiration to me. I have been pestering Virginia for some 20 years now with questions regarding troublesome wares and forms, all of which she has answered with patience and an impressive thoroughness that can only come from a very deep well of substantial knowledge. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce Virginia L. Bauer. Thank you.
Can you hear me? I have to hold on to this because I don't have a pocket. It is really a pleasure for me to be here. I feel greatly honored to be asked to speak at Sotheby's, to be associated in any way possible with the Oriental Ceramic Society. I'm also delighted to see some old friends and colleagues and others in the audience. When I received the email asking me if I would like to give some kind of a talk about sewn ceramics, somehow, instantly, this title, Elegance and Serenity, the Enduring Appeal of Sewn Ceramics, occurred to me. Not only did that instantly occur to me, so did the fact that I wanted to have this northern sewn dingware pillow in the shape of a young boy, the frontispiece for this talk. Now, then I thought, why did I think this? Why do we always think of elegance when we think of sewn ceramics? I also thought, why do I feel, and why do others feel so serene when they look at sewn ceramics? And as we look at the face of this young boy, he looks pretty serene too. Part of my talk today is addressing this issue. What is it about sewn ceramics? Are they really always so elegant, so serene, or is this something that we have learned to look for in sewn ceramics by reading scholars or by thinking about it or hearing from people? Oh, sewn ceramics, classic Chinese ware. I also specifically wanted to use this dingware pillow as the frontispiece because I think dingware, this whiteware, is the most difficult of sewn ceramics to appreciate without seeing it in person. And I say this as someone who never liked dingware when I looked at it in books. It was only when I was in Taiwan, way back in the 1970s, when the National Palace Museum exhibition halls weren't modern. That is, they were just full of all kinds of ceramics. You never saw so much dingware all in a big case. You never saw so much roux-ware. You never saw so much of any type of ceramic as you did in those old galleries. But that's where you learn to appreciate it. That's when you can see it for yourself. Now, the occasion for my talk is obviously the exhibition sale upstairs, Chinese art through the eye of Sakamoto. And here you see 4 pieces. I hope all of you go up, and if you've already looked, I hope you look again. You can never look too much at sewn ceramics. Here are the other 4, and they are not a comprehensive, nor are they necessarily a completely representative group of sewn ceramics, and my talk is going to not be completely comprehensive, nor necessarily representative of everything that one might discover about ceramics. And again, one of my purposes here for all of you, many of whom I know are very familiar with all kinds of ceramics, is to be the professor and tell you, go upstairs and look again. Now, the 8 pieces upstairs are not the only sewn ceramics that Mr. Sakamoto has had something or other to do with. Here we see on the left a very dapper Mr. Sakamoto in London in 1962. In the upper right-hand corner is a reproduction of a jade, archaic jade form, stone-shaped vessel that he acquired very early in his years as an art dealer. At that time, he was really more of what he calls a runner, and what my relatives in the Midwest who frequent flea markets might call a picker. He was just getting started in the art business. And this was one of the things he purchased that turned out well, that he was happy with. It ultimately was sold to another person, and it is now in the Tokyo National Museum, where it is judged to be an important cultural property. On the lower right is another work that passed through his hands and relatively recently was sold at auction last April in 2014. A truly wonderful northern Song dingware basin. And the slide alone tells you how hard it is to appreciate or to see dingware in a slide. This particular piece belonged to the renowned collectors, Mr. and Mrs. Alfred Clark, who are always described in the literature as the renowned British collectors, Mr. and Mrs. Alfred Clark, acquaintances of Sir Percival David. An interesting aspect, though, of Mr. Alfred Clark is that he was born in New York City, and his early success in the recording industry was in New Jersey, where he was associated with Thomas Edison. He then went to England, he then went to France, and then went to England, where he met his wife and became a naturalized citizen, ultimately becoming the head of the EMI records in the 1940s. But we can kind of claim him as an American. Now, most of us have a pretty good idea of what we think of when we say Song ceramics. But actually, as a few people, if they were upstairs looking really carefully at the labels, might have said, well, why is this called a Jin? And it's not. Why is it attributed to Jin dynasty? What's the Jin dynasty? Why is that here? Isn't everything supposed to be Song? In general, when we're talking about Song dynasty ceramics, 960 to 1279, it's usually among collectors and others to assume to include any ceramics made in regions that are now part of China under the non-Chinese dynasties of the Liao, Jin, and the Xisha. And we may or may not make further distinctions between northern and southern wares, and it's also often the case that you will even find 5 dynasties, that is, the preceding dynasties, wares all included in the discussion. It's a good way, I think, of being embracing and being open-minded in terms of what Song ceramics might be, not being quite so particular. Now, Song ceramics didn't just appear out of nowhere, as indeed no art form does. Probably the most influential Tang dynasty and 5 dynasties forebear of Song celadon glazed stoneware, whether it is made in the north or in the south, where yueware is made, dating to the Tang and 5 dynasties, is yueware of Zhejiang province. And here are a couple of examples. On the left, a Tang vessel recovered from the vault under the pagoda at Famen Temple, dated to the 9th century, really prior to 873. Very much in the jade-like form that we find praise of yueware in Tang Dynasty literature, particularly about tea. And on the right, a wonderful work in the Metropolitan Museum, attributed to the 5 dynasties, carved and incisive design. Also, a very spectacular piece. And again, don't underestimate our resources here in New York. Please always take a second look at everything you see at the Met, at Asia Society, and other places. Here, I would like to point out, especially in the Faden, that's just too far, that we see the simple, elegant line here, already in the tong, that is often said to be a characteristic of the sung. How could we tell that is tong? Possibly the very sharp edges on the sides, the fact that if we were to see it in real life, it's not quite so perfect in terms of finish on the glaze. The glaze is a little thin. Nonetheless, it's a beautifully finished piece, as well it should be, as it was probably made for the emperor. Now, yueware, I want to continue a little bit with that here, continued to flourish in the 10th century, as shown by these two vessels in the Shanghai Museum. The jar on the left with fine carving of a peony, and the vase on the right featuring a 4-character inscription. Can't see it here, but it is there, equivalent to 978. But they declined in the 11th century, being superseded by other kilns as suppliers to the Sung imperial court, mostly northern-based Celadon wares, as well as the main Zhejiang-based kiln complex by the more southerly Longquan kilns. Now, on the other hand, when we turn to whitewares, the most influential Tang and 5 dynasties forebear of Sung white high-fired stoneware and porcelain, north or south, dating to the Tang and 5 dynasties, has to be what is known as Xingware of Hebei province. And for those who are not familiar with ceramic terminology, I know most of you are, but there's always a newbie in the crowd. Many of the names that we're hearing that I'm saying today, Xing, Ding, Yue, are place-based, originate in a particular area in China, and then they become associated with a particular ware. That's the simple explanation. Now on the left, we see a 9th century Tang Dynasty Xingware bowl in the Idemitsu Museum. And there are many like this type of bowl that have been found in areas of Iran, Iraq, Samarra in particular. On the right, and I owe on the right this comparison to Rose Kerr and her book on Sung ceramics, we see a comparison of northern Sung Xingware on the left with the ware that supersedes it and which becomes the dominant whiteware in the northern Sung, a dingware vessel made at the time. So at the top on the left is Xingware, on the right, dingware. Again with slides, again with PowerPoint slides. My not very favorite use of favorite form of illustration. It's very hard to see that the dingware, that on the right, is a little bit creamier, a little bit more ivory in tone, and the Xingware has a silvery tone to it. Like yueware, Xingware stays active in the early part of the Sung and then is really overshadowed by dingware. Don't forget, these ceramics were used. They were not in the Sung dynasty set on a big pedestal, even by the emperor for the most part, and just admired. Here are two details from well-known paintings. The one on the right is attributed to the 10th century, perhaps was painted a few centuries later in the 11th, 12th, 13th century, showing a party at the home of a high-ranking individual. The painting on the left, attributed to Song Emperor, Northern Song Emperor Huizong, shows what is described as a literary gathering. The one on the right is in the Palace Museum in Beijing. The one on the left is in the National Palace Museum in Taiwan. It's hard to see the ceramics, and we end up in a bit of a circle here, because often painting specialists who want to prove that this or that painting is truly 5 dynasties or Song will say, well, let's look at the ceramics. That will show that they really are this. On the other hand, in the case, for example, of the painting on the right, which you can see a little bit better, one of the clues that painting historians take to saying it's probably really not from the 10th century is that the ceramics look a little bit more like what is usually found in southern Song excavations and sites, and so they use that for this evidence. What I would like to emphasize here is that these ceramics were used at the time, and as time goes on, they become objects of admiration. Now I want to talk briefly about Chinese attitudes towards Song ceramics in the Song, in the Ming, and the Qing. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about attitudes towards Chinese ceramics in the Middle East and in Japan. And then finally I will turn to talking a little bit about attitudes towards Song ceramics in England and in the United States. So here we see another painting attributed to Song Emperor Huizong. In this instance, it's purportedly a self-portrait of him playing the chin. Way, way down, you can't, I tried to blow it up, is a vessel on a rock. Should have been Sherman Lee's rock. Perhaps he had saw this, he may have coveted it, I don't know if he saw this painting on his trip to China. This painting is of great interest to scholars of Junware, because some scholars feel that this very hard to see here tripod is a piece of Junware. Others not. I can tell you that having blown up the painting is very difficult to say. What we can say is that Emperor Huizong valued some ceramics. And as a sidebar, we often hear about certain types of ceramics being described as guan, or imperial wares. In the Song, for the most part, you have certain wares that what we could say were the highest quality of those wares were requisitioned in many instances for imperial use. There are a few instances where it may be the case that certain types of wares are only made for the ruler, especially in the southern Song when we're talking about certain southern Song kilns. But as archaeology has revealed, many kilns where what we might call imperial quality ceramics were created also made wares that went out to the